If you clicked on this video, that means that you want to start investing. Or maybe you already have started, but you don't really feel like you know what you're doing or if you're doing it right. In this video, we're going to explain everything that you need to know and go through the in-depth, step-by-step process of everything you need to know so you can start investing. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what you need to do first, and you'll be ready to fully jump in and get started. Now, keep in mind that there's so much to cover when it comes to investing, but we're going to walk you through the high-level process and explain the options that you have at each step along the way, specifically relating to how involved or hands-on you want to be with your investments. We're also going to be focusing on passive investing in the stock market throughout this video, so let me explain what that means. A lot of the time when we hear people talking about investing, they're talking about a specific single stock that we could buy. Now, it could be a big company that we all know like Apple, or it could be an up-and-coming, currently growing like crazy company like Nvidia, or it could even be a small, cheap stock that people are speculating will grow in the future. The thing is, even though this seems to be what we hear from the people around us, and even in the media and on the news, you don't have to invest in single stocks. There's a proven way to invest and see great results by consistently investing for the long term. If you're able to put a set amount of money towards your investments on a monthly or at least on a frequent basis for decades, then you're going to be in a great position in the future. The most important thing to remember is that time in the market and focusing on long-term investments is better than timing the market and looking for a short-term win. So let's get started.
The first thing we need to touch on is why you need to be investing and have your money working for you. This really isn't something that we're taught in really any stage of life. What we are taught is that you need to go to school, work hard, get a job that makes you as much money as possible. While you're in that job, work hard and get raises, and then maybe one day you can retire. In reality, that's just not how it works. You don't just get to magically retire once you hit a certain age. You need to save for your retirement, and you can't afford to retire until you save enough money to cover your expenses for the rest of your life. Also, we don't even really learn about saving money, but even if you were able to save a large amount of money from your salary every year, the interest rate that you make on savings accounts barely keeps up with inflation over time. You know how prices go up every year? Like a few years ago, I bought a pair of Air Force Ones for $120, and now that same pair of Air Force Ones costs $150. That's inflation. So if you have money sitting in a savings account that barely earns any interest, the cost of the things you buy might be outpacing the growth of your money. So that same $120 is worth less over time. Now, the one exception to this is your emergency fund. Everyone should ideally have enough money to cover 3 to 6 months of necessary expenses in readily accessible cash. And more importantly, or more specifically, sitting in a high interest savings account. Other than this, and potentially some other short-term savings that you might have, your savings should ideally be investments. Let me explain why with a quick example. So let's say that you start with $0, and from there you save $1,000 a month for 30 years at a 2% interest rate. Now listen, when it comes to high interest savings accounts, sometimes some of them have higher rates than this, like right now, but sometimes they are also this low. With this scenario, you would have just under $500,000 at the end of that 30-year period. Now, on the other hand, if you start off with $0, but you invest $1,000 a month for 30 years at an 8% average annual rate, and by the way, this is a standard benchmark that you can use just from looking at long-term results, by the end of that 30-year period, you would have just under $1.5 million. That's $1 million more for purchasing investments instead of just letting your money sit there. Now, hopefully you see that investing is key for growing your wealth, but if you still feel like investing is risky or scary, it can be, but there are historically much more safer and less risky ways to invest your money. And a lot of the time, those less risky and more passive ways of investing your money actually perform better over the long term. Despite what we hear from the media or from financial advisors or even from just people talking about how much money they've made from investments, it's just not true that the riskier or more hands-on investments perform better. There's actually been a lot of studies done on this, and what one specific study found was that passive investments perform better than active investments about 90% of the time. But wait, what does that actually mean though? Well, active investing involves people trying to beat or perform better than the stock market over time. Passive investing involves simply tracking or trying to match the stock market over time. It doesn't aim to beat it or perform better than it. Now, the good news is that passive investing is less risky, and like I just mentioned, the majority of people who try and beat the market end up failing and would have been better off trying to match it instead.
So now we know that passive investments perform better than active investments over the long term the majority of the time. And the good news is that with passive investing, you have less work to do when it comes to actually selecting your investments and staying on top of them. Like Dennis touched on, active investing involves trying to beat the market. One example of active investing would be paying a financial advisor at a bank, for example, to invest for you. Now, the thing that a lot of people don't think about when it comes to banks is that they're there to sell you a product. They're not actually a nonprofit educational spot. So they typically have you paying high fees for their services and also investing in mutual funds. Now think of mutual funds like a basket that holds multiple different investments inside of it, like stocks or bonds, for example. The thing about mutual funds is that they're typically an actively managed investment option. There's someone called a fund manager who's an actual person who's choosing what investments should go inside of the mutual fund. So that's the active piece here. There's that real person who's doing the choosing in an attempt to beat the market. Now, because this person is spending their time investing for you and they're also managing the fund with the investments inside of it, it's more expensive for you to invest this way. You have to pay what are called management fees for their work. The problem is that the management fees are usually really high. And like we mentioned already, they typically don't beat the market anyways. So you're potentially paying more money to make less money. Another example of active investing would be selecting and purchasing single stocks yourself. Now, a stock is literally a little piece of ownership in a company. So if you were to buy a share of Apple, for example, that means that you actually own a tiny little piece of the company Apple. And if Apple's doing well and making money, then that means that the value of your share has gone up and you're also making money too. And vice versa. If the price of a share of Apple goes down, then you've lost money. Now, selecting single stocks takes a lot of active work too. You have to research the companies that you're going to be investing in. You have to figure out how often you want to actually buy stocks of these different companies. You have to try and balance your risk level among different industries and different companies and more. In this case, you aren't paying someone else a high fee to invest for you, but you're still likely not going to beat the market the majority of the time. And you also risk not diversifying your investments properly. So that's a very high level overview of active investing and why it's not our preferred route, especially for long-term investors. So let's get back into talking about passive investments and how they've been proven to result in strong long-term returns.
Like we mentioned earlier, the goal of passive investing is to match the market. But what does that actually mean? In order to explain that, we need to back up a little bit and first explain what the stock market is. The stock market is a term that's used to describe a place where investments can be bought and sold. So that's stocks and bonds where they can be bought and sold. Now, even though you'll typically hear people say the stock market, there isn't just one stock market. It's more of a collective term that includes multiple different stock exchanges, all wrapped up into one overarching term. For example, you may have heard of the Toronto Stock Exchange, so the TSX, or the New York Stock Exchange, the NYSE. So the stock market is a network of multiple stock exchanges where you can buy and sell stocks and other investments. Now, there are different ways of looking at the stock market, and these different parts of the stock market are what's called market indexes. For example, you might have heard of the S&P 500, which is made up of the 500 largest companies in the United States, or the total US stock market, which is made up of most of the public companies in the United States. And there's also multiple global market indexes too. Basically, you can choose which market or which part of the market that you want to look at and match the performance of. To explain that further, if you look up the S&P 500 right now and you see how the 500 largest companies in the US are performing, there are actually funds that you can buy that hold those exact same 500 companies. And when you buy those funds, you can get the exact same return, give or take, as the S&P 500 index. AKA, you've matched the market. You haven't beaten it or performed worse than it. These funds are different from the actively managed mutual funds that have someone deciding which stocks or other investments to include inside of it. Instead, we all know which 500 companies are inside of the fund, and these passive funds are called index funds. Get it? Tracking an index equals index funds. So index funds are a basket of investments that aren't being chosen or managed by a person. Instead, they're simply tracking an index that already exists. There's also ETFs, exchange traded funds, that are passively managed and work in the same way that index funds do, except they trade a little bit differently on the stock market. If you're interested in learning more about this, check out this video on ETFs, but for now, all you need to know is that passive ETFs are a good option too. Something else that's important to mention is the performance piece. So let's use the S&P 500 for this example again. In any given year, returns fluctuate. So for example, in 2022, the S&P 500 was down 19.44%. Now in 2023, the S&P 500 was actually up 24.23%. But if you look at the long-term return, and if you continue to buy into the market when it was down and when it was up, the average return that you would get historically has been 8% or more over a several decade long-term period.
Now that we know that passive investments perform better than active investments the majority of the time, and we know what passive investing is and how it works, let's get into the steps that you actually need to take in order to buy these passive investments. Step number 1 is that you need to pick your investment platform or method. From a high level, your options are either taking a do-it-yourself or DIY approach and using a self-directed investment platform, ideally from an online investment brokerage that has low fees, or using a robo-advisor to invest for you. Doing it yourself means that you're selecting the passive funds that you want to invest in, and then you're purchasing them yourself on a consistent basis. So you'd actually yourself log into the investment platform that you chose and then make those purchases. Keep in mind that there's many different self-directed investment platform options. Now, the big banks have brokerages with online platforms that work, but also do your research because sometimes they have high fees. That's why we mentioned online investment brokerages that tend to have lower fees, and we personally use Wealthsimple Trade and Questrade in Canada. Then there are robo-advisors. Now, these are also online platforms that allow you to invest in passive funds that track the market, but you don't actually do the selecting and purchasing yourself. Instead, an algorithm does it for you based on a risk level that you select. Now, robo-advisors typically charge lower fees than active fund managers and advisors, but they also are typically more expensive than the cost of doing it yourself because of the convenience factor. Now, 2 examples of different robo-advisors in Canada are Wealthsimple Invest and Quest Wealth. Next, we're on to step number 2, which is you need to pick an investment account. After you select an investment platform, you need to decide what investment account you want to purchase investments inside of. Now, investment accounts are the place where your investments, like stocks, funds, or bonds, are held. Just basically think of an investment account as your wallet, and then the different investments as your credit, debit, and gift cards. There are a few different types of investment accounts, but from a high level, there are ones that give you tax advantages and ones that don't. Ideally, you want to use the investment accounts that give you tax advantages first, like tax-free accounts, for example. This is where you don't pay taxes on the profits that you make from your investments up to a specific limit. Now, in Canada, this is called the TFSA, and it's the Roth IRA in the US. Once your tax advantage investment accounts are maxed out, then you can move on to regular taxable investment accounts. Then we're on to step number 3, where you need to buy your investments. Once you select an investment platform and an investment account to purchase your investments inside of, it's time to actually buy your investments. Now, if you chose to go with a robo-advisor, then all you actually have to do is simply fund your account with money, which is basically just transferring money from your checking or savings account into your investment account. And then the robo-advisor actually buys your investments for you. If you're DIYing it, then you search on the platform that you're using for the fund that you want to buy, you select the quantity that you want to buy, and also how often you want to buy it, and that's it. You've officially purchased investments. So the final step is investing consistently for a long period of time. Now, you can definitely change up your investing strategy or change the actual funds that you're purchasing over time, especially as you learn more over time. That's actually the goal. Like maybe the fund or funds that you purchased originally aren't the ones that you want to continue investing in once you learn about other ones down the road, or maybe you learn that you actually do want to switch to a lower cost investment option. Our goal is for you to get started now and then change things up over time as you learn more, but you do need to stick with it and stay consistent.
The last 2 things that we need to touch on are your risk level and how much money you should invest. Now, how much money you should invest is of course going to depend on your personal situation. Our personal method is setting up a budget where you account for your essential expenses first. So what you have to spend your money on, like rent and food. And then see how much money you can afford to invest. And then after that, finally, you see how much money is left over for extra spending on your wants afterwards. The key is investing as much as you can afford to on a consistent basis, and then setting up automatic contributions so that you don't even have to think about it. Also, remember that you can increase the amount of money that you invest over time as your income grows. Now, risk level is another topic to consider. And listen, there's a lot that we can say when it comes to risk level, but at a high level, if you're younger and you have many years until retirement, you have the time to ride out the short-term dips in the market, and you can be more risky with your investments. If you're older and have less years until retirement, then you'll want to reduce the amount of risk that you take on within your investments. In general, the amount of risk that you plan to take on within your investment portfolio should actually align with the specific investments, aka the funds that you select and purchase. So now you know how to invest for the first time. And listen, I know that this was a lot of high-level information being thrown at you, but the key takeaway is that you can invest passively for your future, get started now, and stay consistent over the long term if you want to see those high long-term results. If you have any questions, ask away in the comments and check out the other videos on our channel for more in-depth explanations. And with that, we'll see you next week with another video.